Today was day 3 in Donna Adelson's trial, and the prosecution had some more witnesses that are really building the case that Donna Adelson was absolutely part of the conspiracy to murder Dan Markel. Now, yesterday, we heard from Robert Adelson, and he dropped some really bombshell testimony about the conversations that he had with Donna Adelson after the murder of Dan Markel. And if you haven't seen that, you definitely have to go check out that testimony. We did a video on that yesterday. Definitely go check that out. But today it continued. And it continued with first Jeffrey Lacasse. Now, Jeffrey Lacasse was Wendy Adelson's boyfriend after the divorce was final with Dan Markel. Now, even though the divorce was final, they were still filing motions, relocation motions, and grandma motions, as we know already. But Jeffrey Lacasse was Wendy Adelson's boyfriend. They started dating in September of 2013. That continued through July of 2014, right around the time of the murder of Dan Markel. And you're going to see whether that was actually coincidence or not. Now, he said that the divorce was a constant point of communication. They were always talking about the divorce. She was always talking about the divorce. The relocation motion came up many, many times, and the custody issues with the kids. And she very, very much wanted to relocate her family, with her family, to Miami. Why? Because she hated Tallahassee. And she made it known to Jeffrey that she hated Tallahassee. That was also a topic of conversation that they always had. Okay, so that's very clear from Jeffrey Lacasse that Wendy Adelson was not comfortable with Tallahassee, was not completely fine with living in Tallahassee. She hated it. Now, fast forward a couple months into the relationship. So he had in March 11, 2014, he had this dinner. He had this dinner with Wendy Adelson, his girlfriend, and Charlie Adelson, and then Charlie's girlfriend at that point, which was Katie McManua, Catherine McManua, which we're going to hear from later in the today's testimony. So after they had dinner together, they went to Charlie's house, and Charlie had a roommate there, a different doctor, and it was a very nice house. You know, 2 doctors, can share the expenses. I'm sure they can live in a nice house together. So Jeffrey came there, and they were having a nice time at the house, and they were in the hot tub, Charlie's hot tub. And in that hot tub, that was when Charlie told Jeffrey that he knows people from both sides of the tracks. He knows people that are doctors and, upstanding individuals, but he also knows people that are part of the criminal element. And he specifically mentioned the Cuban neighborhoods that he happens to know people that run in those circles. Okay, well, then later, after this first meeting with Charlie, that was the only time that he met with Charlie. But after he was talking with Wendy Adelson, and at some point they were talking about Wendy and Dan's son. And Wendy wanted him to get tested to see whether he's gifted in a certain way. Okay. And this is where something happened, which we have to play because it has to do with lawyering. So we have to play what happened here. And I wasn't exactly so impressed by the way that the defense dealt with what happened. So they were talking about testing Wendy's oldest son. And then at some point, Wendy asked Jeffrey about when a child begins to develop autobiographical memory. Okay, so if you haven't heard about this in the previous trials, there's a reason for that because it didn't really come up. So let's listen to what happens in this trial, and we'll see how the defense deals with it, and then we'll talk about why I wasn't overly impressed with it. So here we go.
I want to ask you about an incident involving, I think the context is assessing Wendy's oldest child for gifted placement. Do you know where I'm going with that?
Yeah, I do.
Okay, can you tell the jury, please?
Wendy was looking to get her older son tested to see if he was gifted to get him placed in school. This is spring 2014. And I was trying to put her in touch with some people that could do that. And we were talking about that, and she asked me when children develop autobiographical memory.
Is your training or profession such that you have some knowledge that you could offer on that topic?
Your Honor, he's not disclosed as an expert.
Okay, now if you didn't hear that, the defense attorney objects, which is proper, exactly what he should have done. He objects, and that's Joshua Zellman, that sounds like he's about to give expert testimony, and that's not what he's hearing. He's here for a fact witness. He's not being brought in as the expert Jeffrey Lacasse. He's brought in as a fact witness, which is like a lay witness. So if he's going to give an opinion, that's inappropriate. So he objects to that for that reason. Now listen to what happens.
And to establish a foundation as to
why this testimony could be given by this individual in this government.
So the judge sustains the objection properly.
I'm not offering it for its truth, Judge. It goes to Ms. Adelson's state of mind and motive.
So now the response here is that we're not, it seems like she's responding to what she may have perceived as a hearsay objection. And she's saying, well, it goes to her state of mind. So essentially what the answer here is that, no, we're not offering this Jeffrey Lacasse as an expert to testify about autobiographical memory. We want to hear what Wendy's state of mind was when she's asking Jeffrey about autobiographical memory for a child.
Very well. As to that purpose, I will admit it. However, as to that limited issue only, can this be considered by the jury?
So, I mean, you're not an expert on children's autobiographical memories, are you?
Not really. That's in some of the textbooks I teach out of, but I think I can keep it out of the scientific realm and explain it commonsensically, which is how I responded to Wendy. Children at age 2 have amnesia, which most parents probably realize. Between 3 and 4, kids start to develop the ability to retain memories.
And now the defense again properly objects because he's trying to explain what autobiographical memory is and what his opinion is about when children have amnesia, when they actually start to develop a memory. And that really is not part of what he's supposed to be doing here, right? The prosecution is supposed to be asking, okay, about the conversation between Wendy and him to develop or to argue that there's some sort of, what her state of mind was at that time. Okay, so the defense here is right.
As to a specific thing that goes to the state of mind of the individual you were testifying about, Mr. Lacoste, you may speak. As to your knowledge of any literature or research on this matter, I do not need you to testify on that matter.
And again, the judge makes the right ruling here and says exactly that. Okay, you can talk about Wendy's state of mind, but you can't start talking about what you know about autobiographical memory. Whether you think that that's expertise or not, you can't talk about that.
What is your profession? What is your background?
I'm a professor of social work. I teach mental health courses.
Okay. So Wendy asks you what?
She asked me when kids develop memory. At what age will kids start to remember what happened to them when they were a kid?
And what was your answer?
I think I said 5 or 6.
Again, this is expert testimony.
Overruled, Mr. Zalman, sit down. You may testify concerning not the truth of the matter asserted, but how this affected the state of mind of Wendy Adelson.
Your Honor, this has not been disclosed to the defense.
Please.
Okay, so now at this point, it actually moves to a different topic. So you got to keep track of what the topics are. So the first topic was he's not an expert. And then we moved on to hearsay, which is allowed to be offered for not for the truth of the matter asserted, but for Wendy's state of mind. Now, Mr. Zalman says, now he moves on to a different topic, that this was never disclosed to the defense. It was never disclosed to the defense that he's going to be talking about this conversation that happened. So now this is getting into a discovery violation. Now he's arguing something completely different. Okay, now what you have to give credit to for Mr. Zalman is the fact that he's not just sitting down and taking it, even though the judge is expressing his frustration and even told him to sit down. Still, as the defense attorney, sometimes this may irk judges, but this is what you have to do. You got to get up there, and you have a client to represent. You have a record to protect, and you have to get up there and make your record. So that's exactly what he said. He said, and he did it, respectfully. He said this wasn't disclosed, and he's making his record. And now watch what happens. So up until this point, everything's perfect. The defense attorney is doing exactly perfect his job, a great job, making sure Jeffrey Lacasse is not giving expert testimony, and now making the record about the discovery violation. And now let's see what happens. So the judge says, let's approach. Okay, so now we're going to fast forward where they approach, and we'll get to the next part about what happened. So basically, after they approached, so he sent the jury out, and he said, okay, if this is a discovery violation, we can't have this testimony because, this is trial by surprise. So then Georgia Koppelman's response was, no, this was brought up in depositions. We did bring this up in depositions with Jeffrey Lacasse, so this is fair game. They were on notice about this line of questioning. Okay. And then the judge says, okay, well, you got to find it because they're saying that this was never brought up. The defense is saying this was never brought up. Georgia's saying that this was brought up. So he excused the jury, which is, again, this is exactly what should be done, and give the prosecutor the time to find it. And if she can find it, so then she can ask Jeffrey Lacasse the questions. If not, well, then you're going to have a problem because there's a discovery violation, and already the jury heard parts of this testimony. So now let's see what happens here. Okay, so the judge coming back and asking Georgia Koppelman if she was able to find it.
Did you find the information that you were seeking to
Yes,
elicit?
sir. I'm sorry, I didn't have an answer for you. The case has had so many incarnations, it's hard for me to remember who knows what, but I am conceding the violation, certainly not intentional. I did not find it. Mr. Rashbaum did not depose this witness, so I'll move on.
Okay, so there you go. So there you have the prosecutor admitting that this was a violation. This was a discovery violation. It just came out in front of the jury. The jury heard this. Now she said it's unintentional, and because this case has been going on for so many years, and so many different trials, and she's saying that she got confused. It wasn't intentional. But now this is where I just was not exactly as impressed as I was at the first part of this whole interaction. The first part, like I said, was perfect. And now let's see what the response here is from Mr. Zellman.
Well, the defense requesting from the court to conduct a Ricketson hearing.
It's not intentional. I would concede that. There are a lot of materials in here. I would just, if the state's going to move on, I don't think we need to inquire further.
Okay, so he says, well, I guess we'll concede that it wasn't intentional. And okay, so just as long as the state will just move on and not ask any more questions. And that's what he was happy with. And then the judge kind of said, okay, I'm going to give this curative instruction. I'm going to give instruction to the jury to disregard that. But that's the only issue. That's my only issue with this. I think, and again, it's hard to think on your feet. I understand that. I've been there. I get it. But this is the part where you say you got a prosecutor who just said that she made a discovery violation on the record. She admitted to it. And you have this testimony that already came out to the jury. So what you do as a defense attorney is you get up and say, Your Honor, I don't know if it was intentional or not, but the jury already heard this. This is a discovery violation. This deposition was the deposition was not taken of Jeffrey Lacasse. Therefore, I don't know what the prosecutor is thinking, why this was a mistake. Maybe there's more going on here. And no, I'm not just going to say that. I'm not just going to sit down and say, yeah, I'm sure everything's fine. You've got a client. You're going to lose this trial, and you got to figure out some way to try to help your client in some way. So this is an area where you would say, no, Your Honor, I'm not just saying move on. I need some sort of instruction. And not only that, I need an admonition. I need you to tell the jury, just like what happened in the Karen Reed case. Remember what happened there where Hank Brennan showed the holes in the back of the sweatshirt to suggest that was caused somehow by this collision. And there was a motion for a mistrial with prejudice, as we all remember, with prejudice. There was a motion made by Robert Alessi regarding that specific area, and they got, even out of Judge Cannone, they got an instruction to the jury saying that the prosecution did something wrong, and they were able to hold it up, and they made a whole scene about it. And that really is very helpful for the defense if you're able to do that, because you're trying to show that, the prosecution is not being so honest with you. Anytime that you can tell the jury that one of the attorneys, and you can show the jury that one of the attorneys are not being forthcoming, that they're not being transparent, and they're playing some games with you, then the jury's going to start being very suspect of that attorney. So this is where you want to push for that. Don't just sit down and be nice and cordial about it. And I know, maybe they get along, and this is, lawyers understand this, by the way. So like, even if you get up in front of them and say, this prosecutor, he did it on purpose, in the hallways, you can still shake hands and be friends. But when you're in the courtroom, you have a client to represent. And there should have been a much bigger issue that was made, I think, about that specific discovery violation. Okay. Well, anyway, then the judge did call them back, the jury back, and told them to disregard all that whole line of questioning. Okay. Now, Jeffrey Lacasse then spoke about this trip. And this is where you start to see a lot of weird things going on near the end of the relationship, right leading up to the murder of Dan Markel. And this is where people start thinking, hey, was Wendy part of this or not? And that's why I think a lot of this trial, what we're seeing a lot of now, is not only this, a lot of this evidence inculpatory for Donna Adelson, but also Wendy, actually. So we'll see what happens after this trial. But anyway, so this is where it gets a little weird. They had a trip scheduled. Then this is, again, Jeffrey Lacasse and Wendy Adelson had a trip that was scheduled for July 11th through the July 17th. And on June 4th, they met. They had a date planned, whatever. They met on June 4th. And she but he, as he explained, abruptly canceled the trip. Now, why? What's the reason to cancel this trip? July 11th till the 17th, which means that they're landing July 17th back in the airport. Now, she abruptly canceled the trip. I mean, at some point they planned this trip. And remember, this is a family, especially with Donna Adelson on top of it, who's planning everyone's trips, knows exactly where you're going, when you're going, has it all written down perfectly. And I guess it got approval, right? This trip got approval at some point. So all of these considerations probably were already taken into account. Now, still, she canceled the trip. Why? Because the excuse was that July 18th, which is also the date of the murder, July 18th at 5 p.m., she has to pick up the kids from school. So she can't go on a trip from July 11th to July 17th, arriving back in Tallahassee, Florida, July 17th, because on July 18th at 5 p.m., she has to go pick up the kids, and she's nervous that she's going to miss it. So this stuck out to him as odd. And we're supposed to arrive July 17th. Let's say we're delayed for 3 hours, 4 hours, 5 hours. Let's say we're delayed even until July 18th in the morning. We can still make it back because you don't have to pick up the kids till 5 p.m. And this was a trip that they scheduled together. Probably important for the relationship for them to take this trip. But she canceled it. And that was the excuse that she gave. Okay. Now, on that same day, June 4th, they were supposed to have a date that night. So that was like they were during the day when she decided to cancel the trip. Then they're supposed to get together that night, June 4th. And she was a nervous wreck. She told him she's not feeling well. She has stomach issues. He went to go offer to buy her Pepto-Bismol. He eventually came over to her house. But yeah, that was just what happened on June 4th. Okay. Now, sometime between June 11th and June 18th is when Jeffrey LaCasse was at her house. And that's when he noticed the broken TV. Now remember, this is the TV that was being repaired July 18th. So he was there already June 11th to the 18th, sometime around then, where he saw this broken TV. And in fact, she made him watch a movie together on the broken TV when they had a different TV that was completely fine. So she had two TVs in her house. And he knows that she had two TVs in the house, right? They were boyfriend and girlfriend at that point. And he was very close with her, very close with the family, very close with the kids. So he's been there a bunch of times. And she forces him to watch this movie on this broken TV. And the kids were all upset about it because it's annoying. You can't really watch on a broken TV. Anyway, and it looked to him like the TV was struck by an object, and it didn't make sense to him that the kids could have done it. And to him, it looked like somebody actually hit the screen, and that's how it broke. All right. Well, then that was what happened, sometime between June 11th, June 18th. But sometime a little bit before that, April 21st, 2014, was another time where they were supposed to have a date. And he was calling her and texting her, calling Wendy, texting Wendy. She didn't answer the phone. She didn't respond to the text message. And then he was so nervous about her that he actually drove over. And he drove her to her house, and I think they're supposed to meet somewhere. And he drove over to her house, and she answered the door intoxicated, and not just intoxicated by alcohol. That was his testimony. That wasn't just alcohol. And then she was happy that he came, and she wanted him to stay, but he was so annoyed that he left. Okay, now let's get to another portion of his testimony, which I want to play for you, which is also going to play off of something that we heard yesterday from Robert Adelson. Now, remember Robert Adelson about the text message that he received from Wendy Adelson about Jeffrey LaCasse. You all remember that, right? Well, if you don't, you'll get to hear about it again from Jeffrey LaCasse because he was asked about this text message. Okay, so let's just move it ahead to that point. Give me one moment here. It is right here. Okay. I'm sorry. I went a little bit too far. Let's get back a little bit. Here we go.
I'm going to approach and show you a text message that was sent on June 28th of 2014. I've marked it as States Exhibit 141.
So remember, this is a text message June 28th, 2014.
This text message before?
Yeah, you showed this to me last week.
All right, and this message had never been shown to you before last week, right?
Right.
And it's been testified that this was from Wendy Adelson to her brother Rob Adelson, but it concerns you.
Yes.
Is there anything factually incorrect in what Wendy Adelson is stating in that text message?
Well, she says, I haven't told mom and dad about me. I met them multiple times. It's impossible that they didn't know we were dating. For example, I was aware that when that Donna wasn't thrilled that I wasn't Jewish, so that doesn't add it. This doesn't make sense to me in terms of like seeing me for 6 or 7 months.
So
And
in that text message, she's saying, that you're a secret boyfriend from the parents. Were you a secret boyfriend from the parents at that time?
it's implausible. No, I don't
In
think so.
fact, you met the parents several times.
Yeah, and I had conversations with them, limited conversations, but conversations. And the other part that's I think really significant is the kids talked about me constantly. I have all kinds of text messages and emails where Wendy's mentioning the kids are down in South Florida talking about me.
So again, it just makes you wonder why? Why would Wendy make that up? Why would Wendy tell Robert, her brother, I got this new boyfriend, June 28th, 2014. I got this new boyfriend, Jeffrey Lacoste. My parents don't know about him when the parents very clearly and obviously do. And it also makes sense that they do because Donna was very on top of her kids, right? So the whole thing makes no sense. And there's Jeffrey saying, yeah, this whole thing doesn't make sense. Why would she do that? Why would Wendy do that? Okay. So you can put it in the comments about what that was, unless maybe she's planning something. And this is what Jeffrey thinks, that Jeffrey was supposed to be the fall guy, as we've spoken about yesterday a little bit. Okay. Well, we're going to hear more about that as we go on. Now, on June 29th, 2014, they had a fight. Jeffrey Lacasse and Wendy Adelson had a fight because he had suspicions that, number one, that she was seeing other men, and number two, that she was just stringing him along. So he started to feel that, I'm not sure if this is a real relationship. I don't know what's going on here. I just feel like I'm being strung along here for some reason. Maybe I'm being used. So they had this fight, and they had the next day they drove to Tallahassee. So it was a very awkward drive together to Tallahassee, June 30th. And he thought, okay, it's a good chance that the relationship is over at this point. But look, nothing was officially that this is over. So the relationship did continue. It continued somehow over texts and calls, and he spoke to the kids. So there was something continuing about this relationship. There's just nothing. There was no finality. There was just no closure. It just was continuing for some reason that he couldn't figure out. And then the next time that they met was July 13th. Okay, July 13th was the next time they had dinner and a movie. And again, they spoke about the relocation. And she said at that point, July 13th, that the only time she would be able to relocate is if something were to happen to Danny. And this was at the point of July 13th. Wendy tells Jeffrey, this is what he said, can I tell you something confidentially? I want to tell you something in confidence. And because they're talking about relocation and they're talking about the only way that anything would happen is if something were to happen to Danny, something were to happen, meaning that Danny would somehow not be alive anymore. And she said to him that last summer, my brother, meaning Charlie, looked into all options to take care of the Danny Markel problem, including looking into a hitman, and it would cost $15,000. In other testimonies, by the way, in other trials, he would say that actually was changed, that it was really $50,000, but okay, he didn't change it at this point. He didn't correct it in today's trial, but that's what she said. And this was no joke. She was dead serious when she said this. And we know that there's a joke about a TV being cheaper than a hitman. This has nothing to do with that, as he was saying, testifying today. Okay, now the next day, this is July 13th. Now the next day, July 14th, they met at yoga. And he tried to talk again about the relationship in the parking lot after they're done with yoga for some reason. After they went to yoga, he was not very happy about going to yoga, but they were talking about he was trying to figure out what's the story with the relationship. And he thought it was over. He basically thought it was over on July 14th. And he took about 15 steps. And then all of a sudden she started asking him a whole bunch of questions about his trip to Tennessee, which was supposed to be the next day, July 15th. Oh, this was 13th, so July 15th. Sorry, so 2 days later. And we know that that's the day that Dan Markel was murdered. Now Jeffrey Lacasse scheduled this trip to Tallahassee on Friday. Or maybe it was I'm sorry, I said Tallahassee, to Tennessee. He had a trip scheduled to Tennessee on Friday, and he was about to leave her. He was going to leave her around 11 o'clock in the morning. This is the same morning that Dan Markel was murdered. And okay, but he started asking all these details about his trip. After he seems like this relationship is over. He felt that this is it. This is the yoga. That's it. We're done. We tried, and the relationship's over. But then she started getting very interested about all the details of his trip. And then he gets an email from Wendy after this yoga date, if you want to call it, and asked for another week, I guess, to reconsider the relationship, and asked for no contact with him until July 21st. Okay, so that was one odd thing that happened. Now, July 13th, just another nugget before we actually play for you a very interesting clip. But July 13th, he said that if you looked at her house, she had all this art up by the kids. The kids would make this art and put it on the walls. And she never removed any of the art that they put on the walls. And then at some point, July 13th, she started removing some of the art from the walls. And that was the entire context of this line of questioning. Then they spoke about the celebration dinner. Now, there's some sort of celebration dinner, which is that 10 days after the murder of Dan Markel, Wendy and Charlie went to dinner, and she was talking to Jeffrey Lacasse. And she reported to Jeffrey that Charlie said something to her at the dinner, the celebration dinner, and it caused her to vomit. Okay. Now let's hear about what happened on his trip to Tennessee, which he was supposed to be taking the same morning as Dan Markel was murdered. Let's see what actually happened that morning. So let's just get ahead there for a moment. Give me 1 second. All right, here we go.
You vomited all over the table.
Are you aware, sir, that you were suggested as a potential suspect? In
Yes.
this murder? Where were you when Dan Markel was murdered?
I was in Tennessee because I had left on my trip the night before.
So you changed your plan.
I changed my plans at the last minute.
All right, and you provided law enforcement with some receipts and things to prove that you were in Tennessee at the time?
All that, and I got a flat tire, so I ended up getting videotaped at a Kmart. And I know the TPD used that to exclude me with the timestamp on the surveillance footage.
May I have 1 moment, Your Honor? Tallahassee in June. At some point, did you learn that the killers came to Tallahassee in June, not just in July?
Yes, when the arrests were made and the documents were released, I learned that, yes.
And did you put together some facts about your travel plans that day that could have potentially made you a suspect on that trip as well if the murder had happened as
Yeah,
planned?
that Friday, I was scheduled to go to a business trip in Gainesville, leaving at 11 a.m. So 2 times in 2014, I leave town on a trip by myself in my car, and both times hitmen are in town trying to kill Danny Markel unsuccessfully, obviously.
Are you
Well, isn't that a coincidence? So you can tell what he feels about this, that the 2 times he's going to leave in June. Remember, there's 2 attempts here. June was, they came down and then they didn't do the job, Luis Rivera and Sigfredo Garcia. And then July, they actually did the job. And both times, Jeffrey Lacasse was supposed to leave the next day, around that time. So he feels that he was supposed to be the fall man. That's what it seems like to me. And then also, finally, the testimony ended by showing that they rented a car that was similar to the car that he owned. They rented an Altima, and he owned a Sentra. So he felt that they were very similar, and they did that on purpose. Okay, so, but that is the extent of Jeffrey Lacasse's testimony. All right, well, I mean, there was really not much cross-examination. Just a lot of information that he got from Donna was through Wendy. That was all that really came out from cross-examination. And then we moved on to June Mumchinda. So June was an ex-girlfriend at some point of Charlie Adelson. Now, Charlie dated June from 2015 to 2017. So that was after the murder. right? The murder was in 2015. So he said that, or it started at least from before. So he said that in the beginning, the relationship was completely fine. The relationship was a fairy tale, even though it was after the murder of Dan Markel, but the relationship was just wonderful. And she said that Donna was very close to Charlie, and that she had no idea about anything about Dan Markel. And she also said that they really weren't so curious. Again, this is an issue that came up again before. Whether the Adelson family was curious about how Dan Markel died, she said that they weren't too curious about who killed him. And then all of a sudden, there was the bump. And after the bump, the relationship completely changed. Okay, so it's about 2016. All of a sudden, the relationship changed. And right, the bump happened April 19th, 2016. And he never mentioned it to her. And she found out later, but all of a sudden, he wasn't sleeping. He was extra stressed. He was anxious. He was depressed. He was paranoid. That's what happened. And the same thing happened after Katie McManamon got arrested. There was just increased level of anxiety, stress, depression. Now, at the time, she didn't realize because she found out later, but all of a sudden, something changed about him. She also testified that the cash that he kept was stapled. This is the thing that we're going to keep hearing about, the fact that Charlie kept his cash stapled in 10 $100 bills. And at some point, Charlie was talking a lot to Katie McManamon. And as June, as his girlfriend, said, "Hey, what's going on here? Talking to Katie McManamon so much. I'm your girlfriend, right?" And he said, "Yeah, well, you live with me. You know, I'm just talking to her. I don't need to talk to you on the phone all the time because we live together." All right. At some point, he said that Charlie believed that his phone was tapped. That was something that he told June. And she also testified that there was some sort of argument that Charlie had with Wendy about his case, and then, or about this case, and then stopped talking to Wendy. She also testified that Donna was very stressed and was taking painkillers for stress. That's what she said. She was taking something for all the stress that she was feeling for some reason. Okay, and then she also said a very important part is that she reported that Donna said that Dan Markel was haunting her or haunting the family. Okay. All right. Then on cross-examination, she brought out the fact that June gave an interview with the police, and they said it wasn't recorded, but it really was being recorded. Okay. And also that they were going through a horrible breakup. And also Charlie's the type of person to lie, and he's able to make people believe his lies. Okay. And then also she brought out the fact that she was being a little bit too speculative about the Adelsons not being curious about Dan Markel's death. Okay. Well, that was June's testimony. Then we had Ryan Fitzpatrick. Ryan Fitzpatrick is a very close friend of Charlie Adelson. And he also testified that Charlie was very close with Donna and Wendy, and that he also stapled his cash in 10 $100 bills, and he was paid himself like that before. And after the bump, he never said anything to his very, very close friend about being extorted. Right? That's Charlie's story here. We're probably going to hear from Charlie on the stand. It'll be interesting, maybe even tomorrow. But after the bump, he did not even tell his close friend that he was being extorted. But he did start acting very anxious, and what he said ultimately was what we understood was he was acting guilty. And something that Charlie would always say is that you can get away with anything if you keep your mouth shut. And again, also, he testified and confirmed the same thing, that after others were arrested, Secretary Garcia, Luis Rivera, and after Katie McManamon was arrested, his behavior of anxious and acting guilty increased. Okay, so that was really the extent of his testimony. Then we had from Mary Hull. Mary Hull is a financial investigator, so she investigated all the money in this case. Okay, it was a long testimony, but basically it was to show that there was some very drastic changes in lifestyle between Luis Rivera and Secretary Garcia around the time that this murder happened, which obviously they got paid for, right? So Luis Rivera buying motorcycles and the Camry, and his account never overdrafted, which always used to overdraft. And all of a sudden, these months, it didn't overdraft. Secretary Garcia bought a motorcycle, Monte Carlo, Nissan Maxima. Didn't even have a bank account before the murder. Okay. Then went through some other things that Katie McManus would ask Charlie to pay for a bunch of things, car repairs in 2015. She got a new car, a Harvey's Lexus, which was sold for $1,700 on the title. According to the title, it was sold to her for $1,700. And she also got this very expensive $4,608 for a breast augmentation. And also the fact that Donna signed all these 44 checks that were made from the Adelson Institute to Katie McManus, even though Katie McManus did not work at all for the Adelson Institute. Okay, and then there's also 3 additional checks. Okay, so we're going through all of the money that all these people made, and you can tell from their bank accounts that they were obviously paid a lot of money during this time for something, which happens to be around the same time that Dan Markel was murdered, and they were also convicted of murdering. Okay, so that was Mary Hull. Then we had Clarissa Spolter, and she actually worked for the Adelson Institute. She worked for Harvey Adelson. She was Harvey Adelson's dental assistant. She worked there for over 40 years. And she spoke about who actually worked there. So she confirmed that Katie McManus never worked there. And Erica Johnson did work there. She was Charlie's assistant, and she also worked up front. Amy was the hygienist. Katie McManus was actually a patient who came in once or twice, but she never worked there. And she would get paid by a check, right, every 2 weeks. That's how it worked for Clarissa. And there were occasions that she did get paid in advance. There were occasions if, let's say, the Adelsons were going on vacation, so then she would get paid a little bit in advance. But other than that, it wasn't a common situation for them to get paid in advance. She was also, no employee worked remotely, and also Katie McManus was not part of the cleaning service. So that puts an end to any of those type of arguments. Okay. Then we heard from Katie McManus. Now, Katie, when she testified in Sigfredo Garcia's trial and when she testified in her own trial, she claimed that she didn't know anything. That she was not involved in this case at all. I'm not sure if she testified in Sigfredo Garcia, so you can correct me in the comments. But I do know in her own trial, the first thing that Georgia brought out was the fact that she was not honest. She was not honest in her own trial. And she said that she had nothing to do with it. Everybody else knew what was going on, but she had nothing to do with it. So, but at some point now she decided that she's going to come clean and say the truth because she feels that the truth should come out. And she's also, by the way, hoping to see her kids one day, because the way that she is in life, she's in prison for life without the possibility of parole. She was convicted of all these crimes, and she's hoping nobody promised her anything. No prosecution offered her anything. But she's hoping that if she testifies, that maybe somehow she'll be able to see her kids. And the interesting thing is, it's not funny, it's very sad, but she was actually offered immunity. She was offered immunity if she would just testify against everybody else in this case, and she refused it. And she was asked about that on the stand. Why did you refuse such a sweetheart deal? And now you're sitting in prison for life. You could have gone out and just all you had to do was testify against everybody else. And she said that the reason why she didn't do that is because of a man, of Sigfredo Garcia, because he was facing the death penalty, and therefore she just couldn't bring herself to do it. All right. Well, that's why she turned down the immunity agreement, and that's it. Okay, so she testified falsely in her own trials, and now she wants to come clean and say everything that was going on. So she says that she was absolutely the middleman. Charlie solicited her to be involved. Now, they started dating, and this is Katie McManus with Charlie Adelson. They started dating in 2013, and it stopped in the beginning of 2015. And all the way at the end of the relationship, she was actually dating both. She was dating Sigfredo Garcia as well as Charlie Adelson. Now, in October 2013, according to Katie McManus, what happened in October 2013 was around Halloween time. That is when Charlie Adelson brought up the idea that does she know anybody who could hurt somebody else? And she said, yes, I do, actually. Now, they did not speak about who, but she said that she does. And in her mind, she was thinking her boyfriend, Sigfredo Garcia. And there was some sort of voice message which we're probably going to hear that was left on the Adelson Institute, because Sigfredo Garcia left a very nasty message on the work line at the Adelson Institute, and that was because there was some sort of altercation, if you want to call it, between him and Charlie, probably over Katie. And therefore he was upset and he left. He thought it was Charlie. He thought it was Charlie Adelson's phone number or cell phone number, and he left a nasty message there. But the prosecutions wanted to make it sure that has nothing to do with the murder of Dan Markel. Okay, so he explained to Katie that his family is really suffering because of the situation with Wendy. And at some point, after she said, yes, I do know somebody. So then what happened is that Charlie, gave Katie an envelope. Once Katie told him that she has people that can help him out with his problem. So he gave her an envelope, and he said it's sealed, and he only touched it with gloves, so there's no fingerprints. And give this letter, pass this envelope to whoever she knew could take care of this problem. And she did that. She gave it to Sigfredo Garcia, but she never opened it. She didn't see what the contents of that envelope was, but she put it in her diaper bag, and she gave it to Sigfredo Garcia. Now, at some point, she tells Charlie that they need money. Whoever her contacts are need money to make the trip in June. So Charlie gives her a couple $100 for the June trip, and she thought that the June trip was just to scout it out. And this is where it gets a little bit not so consistent here, because it seems that from Rivera, he was actually going there because they're going to try to kill Dan Markel in June. But according to Katie, she thought that they were just going there in June to scout it out. All right. Well, she also said that she has no idea about Dan Markel's travel schedule. This is important for this case. For this specific case, it's important. Why? Because who could have known about Dan Markel's travel schedule? How about the person who was tracking Dan Markel since the day that his baby was born, knowing exactly when he's going out of town, where he is, when he's leaving town? So this is why it was important for Katie to say or bring this out from the prosecution that she had no idea about Dan Markel's travel schedule. Now, in June, this is again June, not July. In June, Katie asked to be put on the payroll because she needed to show that she was making some money, but not enough money. It was to help insurance for the kids. So she had to be on some sort of payroll, but not making too much money. So she did ask Charlie to put her on the payroll already in June, because assuming that everything's going to go through in July, just put me on the payroll now. Well, he did not add her to the payroll until after the murder. All right. But she did ask she did ask for it. And she brought out that was to be considered her compensation for her part in being the middleman between Charlie and Sigfredo Garcia. Now, she did meet Wendy at the beach one time, and they also she also met Wendy going out together for dinner one time, but she says that she never discussed the murder with Wendy. It was only with Charlie. Okay. Now, after the murder, she received a phone call from Sigfredo Garcia wanting to get paid, and she went to Charlie's house that night to get the money, and he was pacing. He was frantic. He had a gun on him. He was just completely very nervous and anxious. He said to Katie that his parents just left. Okay, so this is the night after Dan Markel was murdered, and Katie comes to pick up the money. Charlie tells her that his parents just left. Okay, now she ended up staying the night, even though she wasn't planning on staying, and the reason is that they both took Xanaxes, because I guess they were both very nervous. So they took Xanaxes and they both fell asleep, and she woke up the next morning, and Charlie told her that the money was in the trunk. Now, she didn't check. Okay, it's not the greatest middleman in the world, because she didn't check to make sure the money's there, but Charlie told her the money is in your trunk. Go ahead and deliver it to whoever you need to give it to. And she was trying to call Sigfredo Garcia the entire day, but he wasn't answering. And so she just went to Luis Rivera's house, and that is where Sigfredo Garcia all of a sudden just jumped into the car and was talking to Katie, and then Katie said the money's in the trunk, and he went and got the money from the trunk. Now, she got her money the next day from Sigfredo Garcia. It was in a Ziploc bag, and the money was stapled and damp. So the money was still damp. Katie asked Charlie, why is the money wet? And he answered, because his mom washed the money. Okay, so again, it sounds like she's part of the conspiracy. Now, probably what you're going to hear from the defense is that she had no idea about it afterwards. Charlie just asked her for some money, and she gave him money, and he said, just wash it. Make sure that it's washed. Probably trying to blame it on Charlie. But that is what the testimony was. And all of a sudden, the payments stopped after Sigfredo Garcia was arrested. Now, Donna signed about 40. She said that, yes, the paychecks that were sent to Katie McManua from the Adelson Institute was signed by Donna. And there's about 44 checks that were signed by Donna. And also, even though she was told by Charlie not to deposit it into the bank before the pay period, right? So officially she's working. So if the work is from these 2 weeks and you're depositing it in the beginning of the 2 weeks, there's a problem there. So he was telling her, don't do that, but she couldn't help herself. And she did it. So that was another thing that we were able to see also from the earlier testimony. But she also said that she did. Okay. After the bump, Charlie contacted Katie McManua, and she was supposed to contact this phone number. Remember, the bump gave a phone number, and Charlie asked Katie to go and get to call it herself, or get Sigfredo Garcia to call it, figure out what's going on with that number, see what they want. And okay. Now, she also said that they did speak in code. As we know, we're going to hear about this code, the TV code, and other codes, tenants and properties. So she said that, yeah, they did speak in code because someone might be listening. And she even asked, innocent people don't speak in code, right? So, and she said, yeah, innocent people don't speak in code. Now, some of these questions, by the way, could have been objected to. We did not see a lot of objections from the defense, which they could have objected to. Definitely those last two questions I thought were objectionable to ask a witness. Innocent people don't speak in code. But anyway, so it wasn't objected to. Now, the one very decent point that was brought out in cross-examination from Katie McManua was the fact that how can you not know what you were going to get paid? That's what she said. She said she had no idea what she was going to get paid for setting up this entire murder. And if you're the middleman, how can you not know? Don't you want to know? I mean, there's a lot of risk here. Don't you want to know how much you're getting paid? And she said that she didn't know. She had no idea what her cut was going to be. She also didn't know that Luis Rivera was involved in the plot. And she never counted how much money she got. Okay, so those were a few decent points that were brought out on cross-examination. Okay, now moving on to Sergeant Chris Corbett. Sergeant Chris Corbett from the city of Tallahassee. He's a digital forensic expert, and he's going to talk about also tomorrow. He went on the last hour of the day today. He's going to continue tomorrow talking a lot about the text messages and the emails, some of the emails that we've seen already and heard about, these emails from Donna Adelson, and he also is going to track all the location of all the devices involved. So Luis Rivera's cell phone, and Sigfredo Garcia's cell phone, and Charlie's cell phone, and Dan's cell phone, all the cell phones he's going to be showing you exactly where they were located and how all this makes sense that these are the people involved in the murder. Now, there's also some interesting text messages where he showed that Donna Adelson was very happy that Charlie somehow talked Wendy out of buying a house in Tallahassee. She was so excited, Donna, by the fact that Wendy did not buy that house in Tallahassee. Also, what was very interesting was that on March 4th, 2014, Donna sends Charlie a text message. Something about that they want to speak. She wants to speak, and she's in the car. She can't speak right now. But once they stop the car to go to the restroom, then she's going to call Charlie. And then she says, erase this text message after you get it. Apparently he did. Maybe he did, maybe he didn't, but they were able to recover it with Celebrite. And after deleting that message, or after what she thought would look like a deleted message, she sends a message about how she has some ideas about what the birthday gift should be for Dad, for Harvey. She has some great ideas. And then they have some sort of conversation in March of 2014, just a couple months before Dan Markel was murdered. So you can see what the prosecution is doing there. Okay, so we're going to see more about the text messages and more about the cell phone tomorrow. Definitely join us tomorrow for the live stream, the day 4 of Donna Adelson's trial. We will be right back here 9 o'clock in the morning sharp. That's going to be it for today. If you haven't yet, please subscribe and like, and we will see you next time.